Okay. I'm glad to be here to speak to you, coastal folks, and hopefully I'll give you some ideas and be inspirational for uh, both plants you can grow and interesting plants to know about. This is the inspiration for this talk comes from my 2010 book, Bizarre Botanicals, which is a book about unusual plants, not just natives, but unusual plants. And so I have extracted from their talks about natives. So Bizarre Natives is the title of this. Weird plants for you to know and grow. And you'll see what I mean by weird in a few minutes. And they may not be weird in the sense that you're thinking about. And there'll be, as I go through, there'll be 4 times I'll stop for questions. And you'll be welcome to ask questions in the chat box, and we'll see if we can answer them. And then I'll hang around at the end if anybody has questions. I'm in no hurry, so be glad to help you all. I'm a retired botanist from UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens, and so I'll always refer to them when I give these talks. So here we go. What is weird? It means strange or unusual, not what you would normally expect. Just as magicians, acrobats, and astronauts are not your everyday people, they are the extraordinary or weird members of society. So this is how I'm using the term weird, not in the sense of something you would see on the Outer Limits program necessarily, but something that's a little bit different, not grotesque, and not might be strange to you sometimes, but they're perfectly natural. Weird is good. Weird is interesting. Weird is wonderful. There are plants that are a little different from your everyday plants. Most can be grown. Some are more difficult. I think everything I'm going to show you today is something you could grow. And I've selected from a broad repertoire of coastal species, and so we'll see some of those. And this is supposed to tickle your imagination as and cause you to say, well, I didn't know that about a plant you may know. I'm going to talk about 4 categories, 4 sections, if you will, of this talk. And the first section is about plants that capture insects for food. And those, of course, are the carnivorous plants, like this sundew. And the second category is plants that capture insects for pollination, like this Dutchman's pipe vine. I'm not recommending you try to grow our native Dutchman's pipe at the coast, but it certainly is the epitome of a flower that captures insects. It doesn't kill them, but it uses them for cross-pollination. So we'll see some examples of that. The third category is plants that capture attention with odd floral structures. So they're trying to attract pollinators or some other reason with accoutrements, add-ons to the flowers, unusual floral structures that aren't really flowers. This Hexastylus lewisii here, which is one of the few of the heartleaf gingers I think you can grow. See how the inside of the flower is full of those hairs. That's a very distinctive trait of Hexastylus lewisii. And they have beautiful leaves as well. Then the fourth category is just a catch-all, plants that capture our imagination. So this will be odd and unusual plants that I just wanted to throw in there, like big leaf magnolia. You should have no problem growing this. It's not native to the coast in North Carolina. It's native to the Piedmont, but it certainly will grow well in a shady situation down the coast. So those are the 4 categories. So 2 things I need to tell you about growing plants in the South for those of you who have moved down here from the North. And you may have learned this already. Here in the South, the plants need to be heat tolerant. You cannot bring with you from New York your lilacs, your apple trees, your pears, your lupins, your delphiniums, your peonies, and other wonderful northern species. It's too hot down here for them. You have to get heat tolerant species from the South, of which there are many. And the problems are that it's just too hot down here. The summer nights are too hot and the winters are too warm. And so those plants are not going to adapt. As a rule, you can bring southern plants northward and they adapt to the cold, but you can't bring northern plants southward because they can't adapt very well to the heat. And heat just wears them out. The other thing I need to tell you about this talk is that the plants I'm talking about are not freaks of nature. They're not abnormal mutations. They're perfectly natural plants that just do weird things. So you won't see things like I'm showing here. You won't see our native Rudbeckia subtomentosa, the cultivar called Harry Eilers, has these tubular petals. That's a freak. That's abnormal. That's not, that's something that occurred in cultivation and people think it's interesting and so they perpetuate it. Or daisies. You see this a lot where the flower fasciates. It broadens out and makes a strange flower. This can happen in almost any plant, but it's not normal at all. It's a freak of nature. And then things like these variegated trilliums and other viruses that cause strange flower colors and behaviors. That's not natural either. So I'm not talking about anything that you'd consider a freak. So the first part is carnivorous plants, and you all, of course, are lucky you live down in the heart of carnivorous plant country, and so you'll be familiar with some of what I'm going to say about carnivorous plants. These are plants that, of course, catch insects for food, and we've all grown up hearing about the myth of the man-eating plant that Hollywood and books and comics and whatnot have perpetuated. And everybody would love for there to be a Venus flytrap big enough to eat you, but there isn't. The only one I know of is the Audrey 2 Venus flytrap takeoff in the Hollywood and Broadway musical Little Shop of Horrors. If you run across a singing Venus flytrap, you need to, not go in that room. Feed me, Seymour. But you don't have to worry about those. There are no man-eating plants in the whole world. There are no carnivorous plants big enough to eat anything much bigger than a small bird, a small mouse, or lizard, and they mostly eat insects. And so you can grow carnivorous plants without fear, and you can have them in, like, here's a dish garden of the foremost famous of our native carnivorous plants, the pitcher plants that catch insects in hollow tubes of leaves, the sundews that catch insects on sticky hairs, the famous Venus flytrap that catches insects with the bear trap jaws, and then the butterworts, which I'm not going to talk about today. They're tricky to grow, and I don't recommend them. They're short-lived in nature, but they are well known. So I'm going to first talk just a little bit about Venus flytrap because they're so famous down where you are. And here's a typical one from the wild that you could see in the green swamp or along a roadside in the right habitat. These are short and squat. The whole plant might be 4 to 6 inches across. They're not gigantic, but they're distinctive and they're fun to find. And their stronghold is down around Boiling Spring Lakes, just south of Wilmington. There used to be vast acreage of them, and there's a whole lot less now than there used to be. Of course, the green swamp is a stronghold, and of course there are areas north of Wilmington where they grow. So within 60 to 80 miles of Wilmington, you've got lots of Venus flytrap country. And believe it or not, this area that I'm showing here has more different kinds of carnivorous plants than anywhere in the world. There's 4 pitcher plants, there's 4 sundews, there's countless bladderworts that are aquatic. There's um, uh, 4, I think, the butterworts. So there's about 20 carnivorous plants just in this area we're seeing on this, not even counting north of Wilmington. So you live in the world mecca of carnivorous plants. And of course, development is trying as fast as they can to destroy the habitats. So I hate to be negative, but you got to keep that in mind. The only way to save them is to save the land because they grow in wet places. If you look carefully enough out in the wild, you'll see some fly traps that are dark red like this. And the key to the fly trap operations are the trigger hairs down inside the trap. The insect has to touch these trigger hairs in order for the trap to close. And the traps that aren't bright red can be almost green. And so you get all ranges of colors. Nobody quite knows why the different colors of the traps. Here, the trigger hairs, of which there are always 3, show up very, very well down inside the trap. So the insect has to be lured in there by these little glandular looking structures that make the insect think there's nectar down in there. So an unwary insect will wander into a fly trap, licking up nectar from the surface of the leaf. And then when they touch the trigger hairs twice, bam, the trap closes in less than a second and they're caught. The bigger insects can force their way out sometimes not. I watched this wasp get caught 4 times and escape, but on the 4th time it didn't escape. And if you watch your fly traps carefully, once they close up and realize they've caught something, they tighten very tight around the prey, and you'll actually see a liquid oozing out. I call it drooling. This liquid is the digestive juice, sort of like stomach acid. It oozes out from around the mouth of the trap. And within 3 to 5 days, the insect is digested. The second group of famous carnivorous plants are the sundews. This is the threadleaf sundew, which is pretty rare down in your area of Brunswick and Columbus County. It's much more common up in New Jersey, and there's another species down in Florida. These have leaves up to 6, 8, 10 inches long, these sticky droplets of waterproof glue on them, and insects thinking that that's nectar, they come there and they get caught, and insects of all kinds. This is the spoonleaf sundew, which is very common out in the green. Any wet place down in your region there, any place that's permanently wet will harbor masses of these sundews. They get 2, 3 inches across, an inch or 3 or 4 tall. They're just covered with the glandular hairs that catch insects. And here's one that's caught something, and the hairs bend over towards the prey, and then the leaf actually rolls up on the prey and it presses it to the leaf, and it secretes digestive juice and digests the insect and absorbs the nutrition. And that allows these carnivorous plants to grow in nutrient poor soils. It gives them an edge up on making their way down in that low nutrient, high rainfall and low nutrients, acid soil. Not a great place for growing corn or cotton or soybeans. The third group of carnivorous plants are the Sarracenia pitcher plants. These are very famous. I've spent my career studying these. They look like a bunch of little mouths. They're talking to each other. Yak, 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 yak. Hollow leaves that catch insects down inside. All carnivorous plants catch insects by leaves, never by flowers. The flowers do not eat insects, but the leaves do. There are 11 species of these throughout the Southeast, 4 down in eastern North Carolina. They grow in, if you're lucky enough to see a wet meadow like this, this is a seepage area that stays wet year-round. The surrounding area is dry, but the seepage area, this is about a 3-acre site, and the yellow pitcher plants grow about 3 feet tall. And it's a sight to behold. Sites like this are harder and harder to see now as development has wiped out the habitats. But you should try to see something like this. Some patches like this over in the Oak Island area that they haven't quite drained yet. The pitcher plant flowers are beautiful. They can be yellow or red, depending on the species. Some of them smell good, some of them smell bad, some don't have any smell at all. They bloom for about a week in the spring, and then the pitchers stay up all summer. So these pitchers are designed to attract and catch insects. The veins, the red veins and the dark red leaves and the white spots are all part of the luring mechanism of glistening light, maybe looking like dead meat, maybe smelling like a dead meat. And so it attracts insects of all kinds that come there looking for nectar or for to eat the prey that fell in, and they're not quite digested yet. So quite a lot of insects get caught in these pitcher plants, but it makes the leaves interesting and pretty. It's something you look at year round. And they absolutely attract insects. Here's a fly contemplating suicide. Of course, sooner or later, he's going to fall down in that pit, in that tube. And if you go cut open one of the tubes late in the summer, you'll see the year's catch of insects that have been caught. Moths, bees, flies, beetles, bugs, all kinds of insects are caught in there. I had a student who studied this one year. He cut open and he cut open 250 pitchers in like late July and identified all the insects that were caught, and just hundreds of different kinds of insects. Some come early, some come middle season, some come late, some come for the nectar, some come for the dead bodies. It's a microcosm, and the pitcher plant benefits from all those insects coming there and dying and providing their nutrients. Of course, any successful system like this in nature can be exploited. So every once in a while, you might see a tube with a little frog, a little tree frog sitting down in there. And he's actually snapping up insects that might visit the insect. And maybe he's getting it out of the shade. Maybe he's leaving a little organic matter there. The pitcher plant doesn't mind. He's part of the traffic. So now everybody now, when they go out into a pitcher plant meadow, is going to be peering down in pitcher plants looking for a little frog. And I'll bet you'll find one eventually. Our hooded pitcher plant from the coast here is almost extinct. It's become an endangered species in North Carolina. It's fairly abundant down in South Carolina in the Francis Marion forest. But our hooded pitcher plant with these light translucent spots and the mouth just barely open where the hood covers the pitcher mouth. There are no moving parts here, by the way, unlike sundews and Venus flytraps, no moving parts. And these eat almost exclusively ants. So the ants crawl up the stem, the leaf, and they're guided by this wing, and they get to the top and they look over in there and see these lights and they think that's Disney World. And so they jump right in. And so these pitchers will fill up with ants almost exclusively. And I learned this the hard way one year. Decades and decades ago, when I was starting to study these, I dug one of these up down in Florida, I think, or South Georgia. Put one in my car in a pot to bring back to grow. And the next morning, my car was full of ants that had the pitchers had fallen over in the car, and the ants had escaped. My car was full of ant trails. So be careful if you're messing with pitcher plants. The white top pitcher plant is not native to North Carolina. You might occasionally see one down there because over the years, people have planted these. I've never seen one planted down there, but I know they exist. These are from the Gulf Coast, but they're our most beautiful pitcher plant. You might see these in cultivation. You might want to grow one in your bog garden. They attract moths and they attract bees and all kinds of insects. They're beautiful, tall, robust pitchers. And here they grow in abundance down in South Alabama. Here's a famous, if you're ever down towards Mobile, stop at the Splinter Hill Bog off of I-10 near Perdido, Alabama. You can see these meadows full of white top pitcher plants. If you go out there at night on a full moon in the middle of the summer when the pitchers are up, you'll see a remarkable phenomenon. The pitchers glow in the dark. And you wonder, why do they do that? Why are they white? Why do they glow in the dark? And the answer is because they attract moths. And so if you sit out there at night, a full moon in August, if you can stand the heat and humidity, it's 100% humidity there at night, you'll see these big moths flying into these white top pitcher plants. Quite the phenomenon. We don't see that on our pitcher plants here in the Carolinas, but I wanted to let you know about that. You can grow carnivorous plants in a bog garden. It's a garden where you keep it wet. You use peat and sand. We use Canadian peat and white, and we use pool filter sand because it's clean, white, quartz, inert. And as long as you keep it wet, you can grow pitcher plants and many other bog plants. This is a friend of mine who made a bog out of 2x4s lined with a rubber pool liner, filled it with peat and sand, and the pitcher plants and the orchids and the orange milkwort and just a dozen or so really exquisite bog plants that are not carnivorous are easily grown this way out in a sunny site, and you keep it wet. This was taken down in Brunswick County, south of Wilmington. Create a bog garden out of wall blocks, line it with a rubber liner, fill it with peat and sand. You've got 2 or 3 kinds of orchids, lilies, flowers of all kinds that bloom throughout the season, along with fly traps and things. Frank Galloway, some of you may know him or have known him. He lives down there. This was at his house 20 years ago. You can grow a few pitcher plants in a dish garden if you just want something on the back deck. Keep it in the sun, keep it wet, but not too wet. You want it to drain. You always want holes in the bottom of your. So there's a short pitcher plant, a tall pitcher plant, a fly trap, and some sundews. Or you can see them in the wild. You can go to the fewer, they're becoming fewer and fewer, but if someone can lead you on a field trip to a pitcher plant site, either in the green swamp or elsewhere, you'll be experience these in the wild, which is an unbelievable experience because not only are there pitcher plants and fly traps, there's fly traps in bloom, but you've got dozens of wildflowers of all kinds in the aster family, the lily family, the milkwort family, the bean family, just all kinds of shrubs and grasses and carnivorous plants. While it's a miserable place because of the mosquitoes and the horseflies, you just put on enough insect repellent and go out there and enjoy nature. Or you can go to the Stanley Rader Carnivorous Plant Garden. If you've not been here, you need to go. It's on the northern edge of Wilmington. You look it up on the internet, look up the Stanley Rader Carnivorous Plant Garden. It's a wonderful little 1-acre site on the edge of a schoolyard, and you can park there for free and walk in. There's a million fly traps. There's all of these plants that you would expect to see in a bog growing there. Stanley, dead now, but lived in Wilmington, and he was the only person I knew who had a permit to collect Venus flytrap seeds from the wild, and he earned income years ago collecting 100,000 seeds a year for the seed companies to grow Venus flytraps. So this is a wonderful place with its naturally wet, high enough water table to keep the plants happy. You might also go over at the Plantation Estates development off Oak Island. They have a few carnivorous plants growing there, and so does the Arboretum, the County Arboretum. That's all I can tell you about it. They have, now Charlie can tell you more. So that's carnivorous plants. The fly's demise, that's what's left over when the carnivorous plants digest their insects and take all the nutrients out. So now we can take a little pause here for questions if anybody has any at this point. I don't know if I can see the, Charlie, I do not see the chat box, so I can't see what the questions might be if there are any.
I am looking at it and I don't see any questions at this point. So,
Okay.
Well, let me go ahead and ask a question. You keep referring to, and everybody does refer to, insectivorous plants or plants that eat insects. Do they eat anything else, Larry, like nematodes or?
Oh, that's a great question. There are all kinds of things down in those pictures. They haven't been studied very much. Actually, those microscopic things live in there. There's bacteria, there's fungi, there might be nematodes in there that actually are living in the digestive environment. Maybe some are killed, but some are alive. When my student was studying these years ago, he found a new species of slime mold, new to science, and some mites. He found some new mites. Of course, the mite experts have to name them. Couldn't tell you what they are, but there are mites that live down in there that attack the prey. And so there's really a microcosm down inside of the different species of pitcher plants that make a living there off the dead insects.
there is a question, Larry. I'll read the question.
Okay.
The fly must touch the fly trap trigger hairs twice, not 3. Are the fly traps tuned that precisely?
Yes, twice. They've got to be touched twice within 20 seconds in order for them to close.
Oh.
And that keeps an inert stick or pebble or leaf from closing the trap unnecessarily. So the plant wants to know that it's got something alive in there, so it doesn't close unless it gets touched twice within that period of time.
Okay, a follow-up question to that. Once the fly trap digests the fly and reopens, how does it get rid of the carcass?
Oh, he doesn't. It just has to wash out with raindrops or the wind. He has no way of spitting it out, regurgitating it. The pitcher plants, when they fill up with insect bodies, they just fall over in the wintertime, and the leaf decomposes and all the dead insects that are in there just return to the soil. So that actually gives a little local nutrition, like your own little compost pile in your immediate vicinity, because they have no way of, they just grow new leaves. The fly traps will grow a new leaf every week if they're well fed. And so it's the new leaves that are the most active insect catchers.
Okay.
All right, I'll go on.
Well, wait a minute. There's another question from Robert also. Does the sundew unroll when finished digesting?
Say that again.
Does the sundew unroll when?
Yes, they'll unroll, and they may not work as well the second time, but their hairs are still sticky and they could catch something. But they're again, a well-fed sundew is growing new leaves every day, and so the active young growth are the best for catching things. The same with the pitcher plants. The fresh young leaves secrete nectar, and they're the most active attracting nectar feeding insects. And then as those fall in and start decaying, it attracts insects that come there for the carrion, and the insects that come there to ambush the insects that came there to eat the insects that came there to eat the nectar. And so it's quite a microcosm of activity, and the pitcher plants love it. You could study pitcher plants as their own little ecosystem. I think people have. Okay, I'm going to move along.
Yep. No more questions.
Okay. Second category are plants that use insects and hummingbirds for pollination. So this is just a little bit about about unusual pollination. So this is your kind of normal pollination. This is a Stokes aster. And this is one of the great plants for you to grow in your garden. Stokes asters have giant 3 to 4 inch flowers. They come in blue, and now I think they're white ones and yellow ones, but I really like the old fashioned blue ones. They can take full sun or a little bit of shade. They prefer to be moist, but they can take it on the dry side. Stokes asters actually come from the Gulf Coast where they grow in pitcher plant bogs. The first one I ever saw back in 1985, I was standing in a pitcher plant bog looking at the Stokes aster holding onto a poison sumac shrub. And that didn't go over too well with me, but I remember it. This is a traditional pollination. You got a flower, a big open flower, and a bee comes and walks around the flower and gets nectar and gets pollen. So that's traditional, nothing weird about this at all. And then you get into some odd things. So here's a hummingbird and a columbine. This is one of your earliest to bloom hummingbird flowers. Everybody should grow some native columbines. They self-sow really well. And each petal, these are the petals, each petal has a tube, it forms a tube. At the end of it is a gland that secretes nectar. So this tube fills up with nectar and it hangs out there, and it's, of course, yellow and red, which of course are hummingbird colors. And so hummingbirds are attracted as they migrate north, they encounter these flowers. And what they have to do, poor little guys, is that as they stick their beak up in there to get the nectar, they get covered with pollen on their head from the flower. And the flower does this on purpose. And this is, to me, sort of weird. I mean, bees love to be covered with pollen because they sit there and clean themselves off and keep the pollen and take it home. But hummingbirds don't eat pollen. So to them, this is just a nuisance. And as I say, this is analogous. So you're going into the grocery store to buy some food, you're getting hit in the face with a pie. Didn't kill you, makes you feel bad, dirties up your face. And that's what the poor hummingbirds have to go through. So think about that when they're out there pollinating flowers and getting pollen all over their different parts of their body. Now, here's some famous hummingbird pollinated plants you can easily grow at the coast. The super famous cardinal flower. If you don't have 10 of these in your yard already, you need to make some room, plant some more. These grow up and they love a damp place and part shade. They have low salt tolerance, but they bloom in midsummer and hummingbirds cannot resist them. And then our native Indian pink, Spigelia, which also grows on the coast down in South Carolina, perfectly happy in heat and humidity. It can take shade or morning sun. And these are both hummingbird flowers. You see they're tubular, red and yellow. Nothing unusual here. The unusual comes along that I want to point out to you. One of my favorite plants is the native coral bean, the Erythrina herbacea. It grows in many cases in pure sand. This picture was taken at Oak Island on the north end, or maybe the east end, northeast end, right next to a parking lot. Vicki tells me this is gone now, but this is a magnificent, huge plant of Erythrina. You see how beautiful it is, about 3 feet tall. It's growing with yuccas and other plants. And it is a bright red. Whenever you see a bright red tubular flower, you think hummingbird, but Erythrina is in the bean family. And this is a typical flower in the pea and bean family. And they have a flag petal, then they have these wing petals, and they have a keel, your typical pea or bean. And that is not at all what the coral bean looks like. So the coral bean has evolutionarily modified to be different. And it has its pea flower. It has the red banner, but has lost the other petals. They're sort of hidden down in here. And so here's a flower that says, I'm not going to be an ordinary member of the bean family and appeal to bees. I like it better being a tubular red flower that can appeal to hummingbirds. That's exactly what it's done. This, by the way, is a hybrid that's available, that's easy to grow and blooms all summer. You could grow the wild one, Erythrina herbaceae, and this is a hybrid involving Erythrina herbaceae, and it would be very happy down there with you. It has a unique, not unique, but a distinctive leaf, sort of wide, flared out at the base, narrowing to a tip. And what this has done then is allowed them to appeal to hummingbirds. So they've taken advantage of a pollinator, a strong, long, far-flying, loyal pollinator, and they've had to change their way of life to adapt to these hummingbirds. And so I think this is a wonderful example of something weird that's happened in the plant kingdom, where you can switch over and do something a little different. And they make these wonderful red seeds late in the summer, and the pods open up. And you can go out and collect these now, and if you scarify them, they'll germinate next spring. You can grow your own. These form huge tap roots in the sandy soil. And they also have prickles on them, so you don't want to plant them near a path or where you're going to play. Put them out away from there in sun or light shade, and you'll have a wonderful thing to look at all summer long. Similarly, our sweet shrub is a plant you don't normally think of as being a beach or a coastal plant. It grows in fairly rich woods. And whether you know it in the wild or whether you know it cultivated, it's a great garden plant because it smells so good in the spring. People ask me, why don't my flowers always smell sweet? Well, the answer there has been a mystery unless you stop and look at it. The flowers always occur in pairs along the stem, and they only are fragrant in the evening, about 2 hours before sunset. And that's the secret. And they're only fragrant the first day. So the first day in the evening, the flower opens and is very, very fragrant with this wonderful smell of wine, rich wine. And what it's doing is attracting its pollinator. And its pollinator is a little beetle that's just 2 or 3 millimeters long, one of the Nitidulid beetles, those of you that study beetles. And it is attracted to these flowers when they're open in the evening, and they go inside, and then, believe it or not, the flower closes up on them and keeps them in there overnight. And while they're in there overnight, they eat these little food bodies on the tips of the stamens. And then the next morning, the flower opens and lets the beetle out. And before the beetle escapes, it's covered with pollen. The stamens open in the morning and shed pollen. A little beetle gets covered in pollen. He goes off and visits another flower. So he's going to a series of parties every night. At least he thinks it's a party, because he smells these flowers and goes in there and spends the night and eats those food bodies. They're the close-up of the food bodies. Those are the stigmas that receive the pollen, and these are the stamens that will shed pollen the next morning. And successful cross-pollination results in a seed pod. And these seed pods have fairly large seeds. These are easy to grow. The seeds are about the size of a kidney bean, a little smaller, and they do not come out of the seed pod in the winter until a little mouse or rodent of some sort chews a hole in the seed pod and takes the seeds out. They have no other way of opening those seed pods. So there's a couple of little stories, both for pollination and dispersal, that are a little bit different, if not a lot different, than most plants. So that makes them weird. By the way, you say, well, here this plant is in bloom and there's a seed pod. Those are last year's seed pods still hanging on there after the seeds have been taken out, even though this would be the springtime when they're in bloom. Everybody should have a sweet shrub in their yard to show children and to pick and smell and just enjoy during the spring. Another strange, weird native is Jack in the Pulpit. The plant itself is not weird. We all know Jack in the Pulpit. They like to grow in damp, rich woods. You may know that this is the Jack in the Pulpit structure. The flowers down inside, as I'll show you in a minute, and they're covered by this leafy bract or pulpit. And sometimes they're all plain dull green. Sometimes they're beautifully marked. And the plants with a single leaf, each leaf has 3 leaflets. The plant with a single leaf is a male, makes only pollen. And as the plant grows, it changes into a female plant. As it gets bigger, it'll have 2 leaves. And those are plants that make female flowers. And you take both of these to cross-pollinate. So what's going on down inside? So here's a female jack-in-the-pulpit, and down inside are female flowers. And here's a male jack-in-the-pulpit structure, and down inside are the male flowers shedding pollen. And the pollen is transferred at night by these little midges or little tiny flies. These plants give off an odor at night of a musky odor, and they attract the flies. Go first to the male plant, and then they fly over to the female plant and bring the pollen, and that's how it gets cross-pollinated. And the result of that cross-pollination gives you a cluster of seeds, of berries in the fall. So in order to have these colorful berries, you've got to have both male and female jacks. So if you're buying these from a nursery, always get 2 or 3. You'll need them for cross-pollination in order to start your own little population. So this is a weirdness that you find in the jack-in-the-pulpit family, which is the aroid family, which is a big family worldwide that has this same behavior. The most famous of these jack-in-the-pulpit relatives is the Titan arum. And you see they get 5-6 feet tall. This is one that bloomed at our botanical gardens in Charlotte a few years ago. Oh, look, a Venus flytrap t-shirt. How about that? So here's the analogous to the pulpit, this big bract that surrounds the floral structure, which is this central spike here, and down in the bottom here are the male and female flowers. So the same pattern is repeated year-round, especially in worldwide, especially in Southeast Asia. But another local one that you can revel in is a golden club. You see these in ditches, coastal ditches, every spring where it's wet, up to 3 feet of water. It can be wet mud or it can be 3 feet deep. And golden club grows in there and sends up its flowers, these spikes, and beautiful leaves, beautiful spikes. And what's weird about these is they don't have a pulpit. They've got a jack, which is where the flowers are embedded in the stalk, but there's no protective pulpit around it. But here you can actually see there's an individual flower. It consists of a little female pistil and 3 stamens. And that's all it is. So there's a flower, there's a flower, there's a flower, 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 flower. And as these get cross-pollinated by these little fly-type insects at night, you end up with fruits ripening. Each one has a seed. And so every one of these that gets cross-pollinated will make a little seed, and those will turn red late in the year. And you can grow your own golden club if you want to. These make great garden plants for a damp spot, shade or sun. But the more sun, the more flowers you'll get. Or you can grow them in a tub. Water lilies. What could be weird about a water lily? Here's a nice, serene coastal pond. This is down south of Wilmington. These are a mixture of pine trees and mostly cypress, ball cypress trees. And there's your water lilies floating on the surface of the pond. I'll tell you, these water lilies are deadly, not to you, but to pollinators. So here's the flowers. The flowers last 2 days. They float on the surface of the water. And here's the story. The first day, the flower opens, and it's female. Down in the center of the flower are the female flowers, and they're surrounded in this pool of liquid. And they're very fragrant, and they attract insects. And the little insects, mostly flies that come to visit them, land in this pool of liquid and drown. And on their bodies are pollen grains. Those pollen grains sink down into the bottom of this scooped out area, kind of like a little pit. And down in there are the stigmas that receive the pollen. That all happens on the first day. Then the flower closes up. The next morning, the flower opens, and it's male only. The stamens have opened up, they folded over to protect the female flowers down below, and they're perfectly harmless now for insects, especially flies, to come visit, to pick up the pollen, and then they go from the male flower over to a newly opened female flower of another plant, land in that pool of water, drown, and transfer pollen. So this is the only case I know of where an insect is literally killed by the flower, but not to eat it. The flower doesn't care. You know, if the fly gets away, that's fine. If the fly drowns, that's fine. The flower doesn't care. It just wants the pollen that it brought. But more often than not, those little flies do drown. So that's why I say what looks serene and normal is actually a death trap for flies. On the other hand, you have your milkweeds. What's weird about milkweeds? They're beautiful. Here's a Palamedes butterfly, your most common butterfly down at the coast, orange milkweed. And of course, a swamp milkweed, very easy to grow in a damp spot or not. They can grow in ordinary soil if you give them a little extra water. Those are the two most commonly grown milkweeds. These get really tall and they'll bloom all summer. And if you cut them back, they'll bloom again. And as you know, there's this paradox that the butterfly, the monarch butterfly, can get nectar from any flower. Here's a daylily. It doesn't care where it gets its nectar, but you know it has to lay its eggs on a milkweed plant. So the caterpillar has a very specific requirement for milkweed host. And so that's why you want some milkweeds around, not only to feed butterflies, but to feed monarch caterpillars. But here's the weird part. The weird part is the close-up of the flower. So if you pick off one of the flowers and look at it, you'll see that it has these unique nectar horns. These are the sepals. These are the petals. And these are a new structure called nectar horns, and they're hollow. And they hold nectar, and insects come there to get the nectar of these flowers. And while they're there getting the nectar, the insects walk around the flower and they pull loose from their little hidden chambers these pollen sacs. These are called pollinia, and they're like Pony Express saddlebags with mail. The two of them always connected, and they get hooked on the legs of the fly or the bee or whatever's visiting, and then they're carried to another flower and have to be inserted into these slits around the flower. There are 5 of these. Down inside of here is where the female stigma is. So there's no more complicated pollination than this, where pollinia had to be picked up from one flower, carried to another flower, and stuck in these little slots. They're like coin slots. And so you don't get a whole lot of that happening. You know, it's a difficult pollination mechanism. Here's a bee just leaving the flower, carrying a pollinium on it. I found this picture on the internet. So there's one pollinium. There's another bee visiting. As they walk around the flower getting nectar, they're picking up these pollen sacs on their legs. But to insert them into these slits is difficult. It's done totally passively. And the flower, you know, is doing the best it can. But all it needs is for one insect to insert one pollinium in one slit on one plant in order to get hundreds of seeds, because inside of the pod, all of these seeds are produced from that one act of pollination. And so how it evolved, we don't know, but it works because there are a lot of milkweed plants in the Southeast. And so that complicated procedure there was just weird. Let's see if this will work. This is a little video of a bottle gentian, where bees have to learn to come to the flowers and open those flowers that are not open and crawl down inside. See this bee up here? He's having to open that flower, and this bee can't get that flower open because it's not ripe yet. It's not ready. So it has to go to a flower that's open. So this is a way of the flower. You might ask, why flowers make it so hard to get inside? Well, it wants to preserve its pollen just for bumblebees. It doesn't want to give its pollen to flies or other insects. It just wants to cater to bumblebees. So that's a kind of a weird behavior. End of section. Time for questions.
See if I got any questions. Okay, it'll probably take time for people to type in their questions.
Okay. I still can't see the question box, so I don't know whether
Okay,
you
well, here we go. From Margie Erickson. What kind of flower was that last purple one?
the last purple flower was a bottle gentian. A bottle gentian. There's several species at the coast, and that is one whose flowers are closed always, and the bumblebee has to go out of her way to force herself down into the closed. See, the flower is closed, so the bee has to open the flower and crawl down inside. And this bee can't get into that one, and so she goes over to this one. See, so that's the bottle gentian.
What type of growing conditions are needed for that?
They like it moist and sunny, not full sun, but moist and sort of open shade. That you might find one of these in a ditch or moist woods, the edge of a woods. I see them very rarely. I grow some that I've grown from seed. They are available from nurseries, so you can check around. Once you get one, they're easy to grow. I've had the one I've had growing, I've had for 10 years. And so it's done well in my sort of ordinary garden. Okay. Other questions?
Well, we'll see if there's any more. We'll wait a few minutes here, see if anybody has any. No. I might ask a question in general. Do you have a particular source or sources for your seeds that you get?
Most, believe it or not, most of the seeds that I've grown come from the Native Plant Seed Exchange. We have used to have in the fall, not having one this fall, but each chapter of Native Plant Society should or could have their own seed exchange, and folks from different chapters could share seeds among chapters. Like our chapter, what seeds are left over from our seed exchange, folks will take up to Raleigh or Greensboro or other places they might be going. So that's one way to get seeds. You can also buy seeds, on the internet. There are a lot of plants available as seed that are not available as plants from seed companies. It's a little bit risky because you don't know if those seeds are good, but some things you just have to try. And so I would go on the internet and I'd type in buy closed gentian seeds or buy closed gentian. That's what they're called, is closed or bottle gentians. And I would just see what comes up. There'll be some nurseries that will sell the plants, and there may be some sources that will sell the seeds. And so that's one way to, or I've gotten seeds from a friend that might grow something that I like, and I'll say, when does that make seed? And I'll come back and get some seeds. So that's another way of networking between and among people within and between chapters. Even interacting with the Master Gardener group down in the counties when y'all get together, and just and members could have, on social media, they could say what seeds they have, or you all could have a seed swap in the fall and see what you can share. And you find at botanical gardens like there in Wilmington or down at Bolivia at the extension office, they may have some odd things that over the years somebody's brought there, and keep your eye on the seeds, and maybe have someone who likes that sort of thing be a designated seed collector. In my a big book, my 2014 book on native plants, I do talk about starting things from seed, but you do have to pay attention to specialized conditions for growing seeds. Those gentian seeds are very tiny. I sow them on the surface of a peat, like I might grow rhododendrons or azalea seeds, and they germinate readily after a month of cold weather. But yeah, getting them can be tricky, but you need to seek them out.
Okay, there's some other questions here, but before I do that, I'll make a comment on that. We have had a seed exchange at the Native Plant Festival.
Yeah,
Uh, I think what we need to do as a chapter is we need to promote that a little bit more so and get our members to participate, bring their seeds or start a seed exchange independent of the Native Plant Festival.
that could be it.
I think that's a good idea.
Like having someone who's interested in that be the guru, and they are always looking for unusual or rare. They might order some. I'm always trying out nurseries on the internet to see how good they are. I'll order something from them and see how it works out. The other day I ordered some sassafras from a nursery and received 2 sassafras trees that have been chopped off at the roots from a clone of wild sassafras. In other words, not a satisfactory way to get a sassafras. So you do have to be careful what you get through the mail.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to work at it. And so you need someone interested in that sort of thing and pursuing unusual seeds and trying them. I just finished planting about 3 dozen different batches of seeds that are going to now go through the winter outside and get a cold period. And I hope that they will germinate in the spring. That's what you would expect. And so it takes a little more effort to grow natives from seed because most of them, not all, but most of them have to go through 40 days at 40 degrees, a chilling period.
Yeah. One of the questions here is you probably can't answer because you're not in the local area, but is it okay to pick seeds at, say, the Arboretum? And let me answer that. I don't know. I would imagine they would restrict that, but let me talk to the director of the Arboretum and see what the policy is.
Yeah, there's where you need your seed. You need your seed czar,
Yeah.
who can go be the liaison and who will get permission, say, to collect certain seeds at the right time without ruining the. If you're picking red berries in the fall, you might not want to overdo it. You won't want to destroy the plant. But the Arboretum, I think, would relish the notion that people would see it as a source of judicial seed collection at the right time, and you can collect seed from the wild. There again, you just someone needs to know what they're looking for and when to collect the seed. And that becomes a trial and error sort of thing. You're not going to hurt any wild plant, in my opinion, as long as you don't trample them to death. Picking a few seeds is not going to hurt the wild population. You just have to learn which seeds at the right time. And this is a very important issue because in the garden, if you just have one plant of something, one specimen, it often will not make seed because they need to be cross-pollinated. Even normal plants need to be cross-pollinated. And so you might not have seed simply because you only had one specimen. So I recommend that people buy, particularly for perennials, that they buy 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 plants, usually odd numbers, and plant them so that they can cross-pollinate with each other and make some seed if that's what they're after. And this includes cultivars. The cultivar can be part of your seed cross-pollination population, even though cultivars themselves do not set seed because they tend to all, cultivar will be one genetic clone of something. But you could cross a cultivar of a phlox with a wild phlox and get some seed. And it would be a hybrid of some sort, but it might be perfectly good.
Well, Margie Erickson asked that question, and Margie, answer you. I'm going to take that up as an action item to see what we can do about having more seeds be available, be it from the Arboretum or wherever. And now, there's another question here about your bottle. How do you say that, Jim? The blue one you talked about.
Oh, gentian.
Gentian.
Yeah, G as in George.
They got it spelled here, but I couldn't pronounce it.
Yeah.
Gentians. Are there any other species of gentians growing in this area?
Any other species?
Yeah.
Yeah, the most famous one that you might still be able to see is down in the Green Swamp. There at the Borrow Pit on Highway 211. It grows in the pine woods. It's called the autumn gentian. It's the most beautiful bright blue flower. It grows out in the driest. It doesn't grow in the wetlands. It grows in the dry pine woods, and they have been blooming this month. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't go down and find some still in bloom. So that would be, and I have actually grown one of those in my pitcher plant bog here. I've had it for 10 years. It's gotten bigger every year. It blooms in late October into November. And so I grew it from seed. And so because it grows in the sandy, peaty soil, just not the wettest, you could sow it in a little bog garden or on some of that kind of soil, and seedlings would come up abundantly. These plants are hard to spot when you're out walking through the pine woods, so you might need a knowledgeable person to take you down there to poke around. But it's nothing more wonderful than finding an autumn gentian in bloom, because the flowers are so beautiful and they bloom so late, and there are no mosquitoes then.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, there aren't any more questions, so I guess we can continue on then, Larry.
Okay, we'll move on. Part 3, plants that capture attention through floral enhancements. You'll see what that means. What should be one of your favorite flowers down there is the spotted horse balm, or the spotted bee balm, or whatever different words you want to call it, horse mint, Monarda punctata. These grow in sandy waste areas, and they tend to act as annuals. You might get some to seed around. In fact, I think you could. But what's weird about them is not only are the flowers weird because of their spots and strange colors, but these bracts, these are modified leaves that surround the flowers in these whorls, and these are very conspicuous, and they help attract insects that come in to then see the flowers closer up. These are pollinated by bees, small bees, and so the bracts themselves may be the showiest part of the flower. So I would go out looking for these in the summer when they're in bloom. They start blooming in midsummer. They attract very unusual pollinators, and you can remember where they are and go back and collect seeds later, because they are annuals, and so they produce abundant seed. But I love spotted horse balm. Then the common flowering dogwood may not be the best plant for you all to grow down there in the warmth. I would get one that's been locally sourced from heat tolerant coastal populations. But I wanted to point out that the true flowers of the flowering dogwood are these little yellow nondescript flowers in the center, and they are surrounded by these big white leaves, or bracts. B-R-A-C-T is a leaf associated with flowers, and these are what attract the pollinators because they're so easy to see. And then you get down to where the true male and female parts of the flower, stamens and the pistils down in the middle. And these have to be cross-pollinated. So successful cross-pollination leads to these clusters of berries. That's why the berries of dogwood are in clusters, because each cluster there is from one of these flowers, one of these little clusters of flowers surrounded by the bracts. And these are next year's flower buds. So That's kind of weird to have those bracts like that. Similarly, I'm showing you a Christmas poinsettia. I'm not expecting you to grow these, just reminding you that the poinsettia, the bright red colored parts that we like, are really modified leaves or bracts. They're associated with the flowers. These are the little floral structures here, and they have their stamens and their little pistils, and they're not at all terribly showy. So the plant relies on the bracts. And so now I want to show you what you do have down there. You have our wild poinsettia, a native a euphorbia that grows in waste places. There are two species of these. And, you know, these are not going to replace the Christmas poinsettia among native plant enthusiasts, but they are something to know about, to look for, and to appreciate. As inconspicuous as they are, they're little weeds. They grow in disturbed areas. You could bring some seeds back, throw them in your yard if you like. I would do that because I like seeing these. This gives you a sense of their size. I mean, there's an ant there licking the nectar. Ants are not real good cross-pollinators, but hey, that may be the best this flower has right now. But this should attract flies that will come here, attracted by those red colors, and will get nectar and carry pollen. There's some pollen right there from flower to flower. So I just wanted you to know that we have a wild poinsettia that is often overlooked. It's not going to be in any gardening book because they're not considered garden plants. That's why I'm trying to show you things that you wouldn't normally see in a garden book. You need a wildflower or a book on weeds. The grass of Parnassus, which does grow out in the pitcher plant bogs, is unusual. It's one of our most enchanting flowers because it's so hard to photograph. It's a white flower, but what you want to photograph are the green line. These are the veins in the flower, so it's hard to take that picture, certainly not in the full sun. But what's weird about them is what looks like a perfectly normal flower with 5 petals and 5 stamens has a set series of 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. These are fake stamens. This is what attracts insects. They look like they have pollen because they're yellow. And so insects will come here thinking that that's nectar, and the insects get fooled, but they do come to the flower and they do carry pollen, and they just need to be fooled twice. Once to come and pick up the pollen, and once to go to another flower to transfer the pollen. Then they can say, what a fool I've been. But in any case, they get nectar and pollen. And so they shouldn't be too worried. Growing in the same bogs are 2 orchids that are very famous, the rose begonia orchid. Beautiful as they are, this is about the size of a quarter, 25-cent piece, maybe a little bigger. These are the normal sepals and petals, and this is the lip. And it looks like, for all the world, these beautiful hairs on here are stamens with yellow pollen. It turns out they're not. They're fake stamens. There's no pollen. There's no nectar. There's nothing there for the bee at all. And yet the bees go here because they are fooled by thinking they can't help themselves. They're programmed to think of yellow stuff on a flower petal has got to be pollen. Just like we humans, when we see McDonald's or something, we know it's not very good, but we go there and eat anyway. So the bee goes here anyway and tries to get nectar and pollen and fails, but transfers pollen that they pick up down inside of here as they're probing for nectar. Similarly, the grass pink orchid, one of our showiest bog orchids, these things here that look like stamens because they're yellow are not. They're fake. They're just hairs. They're glitter. They're a promise with no reward. The true pollen is down here in the pollen sacs of this part of the flower, and the bee has to come here, grab hold of that, gets plopped over against the stamens where they pick up pollen, and then they get mad and fly away. And they'll do that 2 or 3 times. And so pretty soon they realize there's no real pollen there, but in the meantime, they cross-pollinate these flowers. So I think those are neat examples of where the flower is enticing the pollinator uh, by trickery. They never give them any real pollen or nectar. Tradescantia, the spiderwort. I know you can grow these readily. There's several species. Uh, some are bigger than others. These flowers last for one day. What's weird about them is, in these beautiful flowers, is the hairs on the stamens. Here's the bright colored pollen. When you look up close, you realize this flower is full of hair, and these hairs are made up of cells. You can see they look like beads. Each one of those cells is a cell. I mean, each one of those beads is a cell. They're one of the largest cells in the plant kingdom. You can see them with your naked eye. They're more fascinated under the microscope. So you ask yourself, why would a flower make all of this mess? What good does that do? That's a lot of work to make all these little hairs on a flower that only lasts for one day. Just think about that. It'd be like you stringing popcorn for your Christmas tree, spending all day doing it, and then just throwing them all away the next day. So they must be pretty important if the flower goes through the trouble of making them. And indeed they do. So one summer I got tired of wondering about this. So I set up some experiments in my yard to watch bumblebees visiting the trad flowers. And I came to realize I cut the hairs off and on some of the flowers, and the bees didn't come there. So not only do these hairs probably reflect glistening light, but it's what the bees hold on to. The bees can't reach these petals to hold on. They have to hold on to something because they fly in very quickly to the flower and then they leave. And so these hairs are there to help the pollinator. And what's better that you can do as a flower than help your pollinator? So they are pollinator enhancements and inducements. Now you know. Similarly, the beautiful maypops, our native passion flowers or maypops with their very intricate flowers. You wonder, why all these hairs and multiple petals and things to make that complex flower? It's only good for one day. And if you watch it during the day, you see that the bees fly in and they grab hold of these hairs. There's no other place to land. If they land on the petals, they would fall off. So the bees grab the hairs, they crawl up in here to get nectar. In doing so, they rub their heads against the stamens. And as they visit additional flowers later in the day, the stigmas up here bend down in order to be touched by the bees and get pollen transferred later in the day. And so all this mess of the flower is part of the intricate pollination mechanism that we don't know why, but it works. A lot of people love to grow these. These are hybrid passion flowers, some of which are tropical. These are all hardy here. Be careful how you plant passion flowers because they have underground root systems that run. And if you plant one of these and it's hardy in your garden, you're going to have it forever. It's going to take over. So I warn people about our native passion flower or maypop. Here's a planting of maypops along a little fence. Now, what could be uglier than this in the late summer? All your beautiful flowers are gone, and all you got left are the maypops. Well, there are a couple of things you can do. In order to keep the flowers coming, you can pick off the fruits. Don't let them go to seed. So if you want this to look good longer, keep the old flowers picked off the second day and give it a little fertilizer, and it'll be lush all summer. Or a better thing to do, I think, is to plant the thing in a pot, a big old pot, too big to move. Plant your maypop in there, train it over your garage, you're on your banister, your back deck, and enjoy the flowers. Keep the pods picked off. It'll bloom all summer, and you won't have the plant creeping through your garden. Believe me, if you plant one of these in your garden, you will rue the day that you did that, because it will creep around and take over your garden with underground stem. You'll never get rid of it. So that's the weirdness of maypops. Questions? End of section 3. maypops are fun to play with. You can take them and stomp them and they'll pop. You can do that for a while. But down inside are some little things you can nibble on. You can nibble on the little seeds. They're sort of like pomegranates. They have a little coating around the seeds that are tasty, and you can eat them, or you can make lemonade out of them, or you can just mold them around in your mouth and spit them at each other. You have a whole lot of fun with maypops. Any questions?
Well, I have a question that's from me regarding pollinators. I started having bees a few years ago with the idea that I would increase the pollination population. And then I heard that honeybees don't really do that much pollination. Now, is that true or not?
That's true. Honeybees pollinate cultivated plants like apple trees and peach trees, and they're very important for that. Grapevines, but our wild plants. Now, there's nothing wrong with a honeybee visiting a wildflower and getting some nectar from it, and they can do that all they want. But some of the more intricate flowers, some of the salvias and flowers that are not the right size or shape, honeybees just don't fit them. And so general rule there is with wild plants, there's a pollinator that fits it.
Right.
That fits it just right. And that would be one of countless species of wild bees and flies and moths and butterflies and things. And honeybees are just, not effective. They might be effective if you had a solid crop of a certain an herb or something you were trying to grow seeds of. As far as our wildflowers go, honeybees are not native, and therefore they don't fit very well.
Okay. So if
So
you're going to have the bees, just have them for the honey and don't expect the pollination.
yeah, they would be making honey from clover, orange blossoms. Bees can certainly make honey from wild plant flowers. They make pretty good sourwood honey.
Yeah.
But for your average native plant in your pollinator garden, the honeybee is not your best pollinator.
Do have a question here, and I can answer some of it as ignorant as I am. There are other native passion flowers. Anyway, the question is, I think I have a passion flower plant that has different leaves than those shown in your maypop photos. Are there other native passion flowers? And I do have other passion flowers growing myself, I know.
Yeah, we have two species of native passion flowers. One is the big blue passion flower that we're all used to. It has its leaves are deeply lobed, maybe with some teeth. And the other is the small passion flower with little quarter size yellow flowers and a lobed leaf that isn't terribly deeply lobed like the big maypop. It's a much smaller flower, not as, it's interesting in its own right, but it doesn't make a bold statement. Those are the only two natives. And so if you see other maypops, they would have been introduced. The tropical blue Passiflora caerulea has been introduced into cultivation, and it's quite hardy here in the Piedmont. So it would be it would almost be an invasive down at the coast. So
Well, that second one you talked about that we have here, I do have it in abundance. And I found that while it's not as showy, it is still attractive to the caterpillar.
oh yeah, fritillary
Yeah,
caterpillars love it.
yeah. So it's at first it was being a vine growing on other stuff, and I was starting to take it off. I quit doing that now. I'm letting it have its
Yeah.
rule because of the Gulf fritillary.
Yeah, just keep it mowed where it doesn't take over more than you want to give it,
Right.
and you just have to keep it in check. If you move away for a year and come back, your house will be covered.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right.
It is contained, but yes. Okay, that was
Okay, we'll move on to the last section.
okay.
So these are miscellaneous odd behaviors. So some of you might live near a ball cypress swamp or pond cypress. These, I think I've misnamed these. These are actually true ball cypress. And the reason is because you can see their knees growing very well. But whether it's a ball cypress or pond cypress, these trees grow in swamps or floodplains. They have wide bases. And the weird thing are the knees. There are no other native trees. Down in the tropics, you get mangroves that send up breather roots. But this is the only traditional tree that does that. And so we remark at the knees. And so the knees are what are unusual. And so you might think these are nice knees. And so you get more of these knees when they grow in a place where the water rises and falls regularly, like a river floodplain, around a pond that stay the same water level, where you might grow a pond cypress. You don't get very many knees. But I'm just wondering if listeners know what these knees are for, how they function. There's been all kinds of speculation down through the years that they might be breather roots, because they do grow up from the roots of the cypress trees. And but studies have shown that they don't carry on any more breathing than any other part of the tree. So I'm going to show you what the true function of these is. It's to make clocks and lamps. And so that's the real reason for cypress knees. But actually, you won't find this terribly talked about in the literature. I don't know. I'd love to hear Paul's experience of stomping through cypress swamps. I think the function of the cypress knees is, there's a cypress knee right there, there's a cypress knee right there, is to, particularly on ball cypress that tend to grow in river floodplains, is to create an entrapment situation for debris that come floating down the river, logs and masses of limbs and leaves and vines and I don't know, dead things that come floating down the river, such that they entrap them and create a little island of organic matter that gives that those cypress trees like their own compost pile. Because down at the coast where the rainfall is higher, the nutrients all get washed away. So anything that cypress trees could do to capture more organic matter for nutrients would be advantage to it. And that's where I think the knees function best, to create kind of a little log jam. So that's what I think knees are for. Another strange flower phenomenon is buzz pollination. This is well known, but people don't think about it. And buzz pollination is what you see when you have a urn-shaped flower. The botanists would call that an urceolate flower, or urn-shaped, meaning the opening is smaller than the body of the flower. So it's sort of like an urn. And down inside of these flowers is the stamens and the pollen. And if you look down inside of this opened up flower, you see that the stamens are little cylinders and the pollen is inside, and they open by a little pore. So the pollen is not just shed, the pollen is kept inside these little cylinders with a pore. When the bee wants to get that pollen, which they do, they not only want nectar, and they can reach the nectar with their tongues, but they want to get pollen, and so they do so by vibrating their wings and creating a buzzing sound. And you've heard bees do this on flowers. They go bzz, 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 bzz. And we used to think maybe the bees were communicating with each other, or maybe they were just humming to themselves. But no, they're buzzing at a certain frequency in order to shake and suck out the pollen from these little tubes onto their body, onto their face, which they then go later and clean themselves off, and they save all that pollen. So whenever you see one of these tubular flowers now, and they come in different forms, the bees are probably practicing buzz pollination. Let me show you an example. The plant I want to recommend to you is a great landscape plant not blueberries are certainly great landscape plants, but one of the great plants that grow out in the shrubby precocians that are evergreen is the shining fetter bush, Lionia lucida, and its spring flowers that are produced in abundance are quite urn-shaped. The mouth is smaller than the body, and the bees that visit this, you can hear them doing these strong buzzing sounds. And you'll find numerous other plants, some members of the lily family, like lily of the valley, like sourwood tree, like other of the fetter bushes, like the dog hobble that you have down there, all have these urceolate flowers. And now you know that the bees get pollen by buzz pollination. This is something I hadn't thought much about until this year, so I'm sharing it with you because it's been brought to my attention. Frog fruit. Underneath your very noses, down at the coast, outer coast there, is this species. In fact, there's more than one species. Lipia, or another genus name is Phyla, Nodiflora. And it's in the verbena family. And these are its little tiny flowers formed around a little cone and little leaves growing on a creeping plant. And this in and of itself is not weird. It's typical of verbenas. What's weird about it is these things grow on sand dunes. I mean, this is pure sand. And there's a beach house. And right over that hill is an ocean. And here's blanket flower and yellow daisy type flowers and beach grasses and there's a sunflower. There's all kind of dune flora here. But this little frog fruit, I did not know why it's called frog fruit. It does make little fruits. I guess frogs eat them. Growing along and rooting at the nodes and makes a little carpet. So here's what you need to do in order, you need to start looking for this out on dunes just so you can appreciate it. Get down on your belly, like I did to take these pictures, and look at it from the frog's eye point of view. But you might want to use it as a lawn. So here is a beach house with non-native but beautiful oleanders and sable palmettos and yuccas. I don't know what all these shrubs are, various things. But right in this area of lawn, we're trying to grow some centipede, I guess, or other things. This frog fruit will grow very happily and you can mow it and it stays low. It holds the sand. And if you water it a little more, you can get a really quite a lush stand of it. And so frog fruit now I'm suggesting is a new lawn substitute for coastal gardens because it's obviously salt tolerant. It grows right out there on the dunes and can tolerate a little. You could walk on it maybe twice a week. I don't know. You could experiment, grow it in areas where other things may not grow because of the salt. And there you go. You can be happy with a new lawn. Frog fruit. You can take it wet. It can take it dry. It'll be at the edges of marshes. It'll be out on the dunes. It'll be along the roadsides. It's probably not available commercially, so you may have to go up and pull up some little units, little root at the nodes units that are creeping out into the road, and take those home and plant them, and start your own frog fruit farm. You could start this and make money as a native plant chapter, or maybe the master gardeners could pot these up and sell them. So my last plants here are unlikely choices, the trilliums. You don't normally think of trilliums down in your area. You have one species of trillium native there, and it's rather small and rather rare, the little tiny so-called Trillium pusillum, the dwarf trillium. But I'm suggesting you can grow regular trilliums in your wildflower garden. You know, if you can grow Virginia bluebells and wood poppies and all kind of other things, you should be able to grow trilliums. But here's the deal. Don't try to grow the northern ones. don't grow big white trillium and the red trilliums and the yellow trillium, the northern trilliums. Look towards the south for southern trilliums that are heat tolerant, like this one's called Trillium flexipes, the nodding or bent trillium. It's proved quite heat tolerant if you can get plants that came from Alabama. Here's some really good ones. This is Trillium cuneatum. They occur over most of the southeast. You don't want ones that came from the mountains. You want ones that came from the coast. They're going to be heat tolerant. And they're going to be what we call the sessile trilliums, where the flower sits right on the leaves, doesn't have a stalk. And these could come up as early as March, early March even, in bloom for you, and have these beautiful mottled leaves. So look towards the south for trilliums. Trillium maculatum starts becoming native in mid-South Carolina and goes on towards the south. And these are definitely heat tolerant. They come up early, late February. There's some with a Adamasco lily. These are available, becoming available from nurseries. One nursery I know that has them is Plant Delights Nursery. You realize in order to buy one, you have to mortgage your car from Plant Delights, but you're going to have a really high degree of success growing these southern trilliums, and that's what Plant Delights is specializing in, is the heat tolerant southern trilliums. Tony Avent has collected trilliums from across the southeast from seed and growing them from seed, and there's some really nice forms. So I'd recommend you pay, get them started, and they'll actually form masses like this. Now here's the weird thing. What I've shown you so far is not terribly weird, other than that trilliums are unusual for being at the coast. Trilliums form readily seed pods if they get cross-pollinated. And down inside of these little berry-like pods are 50 or so seeds. And they ripen by usually midsummer, early to midsummer. And if you break open the seed pod, you'll find the big fat seeds in there. And each seed has a creamy white protein body, a food body called an eleosome. Eleosome. It's a protein body associated with seeds, not just trillium seeds, but many wildflower seeds of all kinds. And these fall out on the ground, and ants come and pick them up. The ants come and pick up the seeds. They eat the food body, and they carry the seeds off and throw them away. And that's how the seeds get dispersed. Ants and yellow jackets will come readily after these ripen seed pods. So you have to pick the seeds the day before they get ripe, so you get them. And if you sow them in the soil immediately, keep them moist, they'll germinate the following spring and come up readily and start your colony. And so I have 2 points here. One is the weirdness. It's not rare. It's just weird of having these eleosome food bodies as a way of interacting with nature. So 2 organisms. The flower, it uses a pollinator to make the seeds, and then it uses ants as disperser of the seeds. So you've got a cohabitation, coalition, cooperation, let's call it, cooperation going on here. And that's kind of what's important in the big picture. And if you're out in the woods, if you're watching after your seeds ripen, you might see any number of ant species carrying a seed. So this is like, a lady going home from the grocery store carrying a bag of groceries. She's got her food for the day in one of those big seeds. And so don't go around stepping on ants. Be more careful. Realize that those ants play a role as part of the life cycle of the trillium to make it work. And that's kind of to me, that's kind of the weird part, that you need to realize that the lowliest things that out there are playing a vital role in the cycles of nature. And so my final thought is, with all of these things that seem weird to us, this weirdness we're looking at, it's really normal in the plant kingdom. These are not freaks of nature. They're normal things that we just don't happen to view as everyday goings on. And so I want us to become more aware of those and tune into what flowers are doing, what seed pods are doing, what we could talk about roots and stems and other weird things given more time. But observe nature more and see all the strange things that are going on that have allowed these plants to adapt to different habitats and different places. And we're lucky to come along and we can use some of them in our landscapes. So a couple of good books for landscaping, the NC Coastal Sea Grant program, that little booklet on landscaping. There's a couple of dozen plants in there. Here's your horse balm with its pink bracts. And then this remarkable new book, I don't know how old, 2 or 4 or 5 years, from Paul Hoser, Seacoast Plants of the Carolinas, with pictures of the plants and descriptions, and especially their seeds and their flowers, and give you ideas on gardening with them. See plant ID and use in coastal landscapes, and especially informational salt tolerance. And so I've read this book almost every entry, trying to see what's there. And then my own recent book, the Southeast Native Plant Primer, of much more everyday types of plants, especially for beginners. Tried and true, the best of the best native plants for the home landscape. And it's divided into chapters on ferns, sun-loving, shade-loving perennials, shrubs, trees, and vines, and has a section on coastal planting, and you can use that for inspiration. But I would seek out local coastal landscaping books if you can. And finally, if you're ever up this way in Charlotte, stop by the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens after the COVID pandemic is over and we're open to the public again, and see a lot of the bizarre botanicals that went into. This is our pet dinosaur, what's left of him. He's 65 million years old. At least he's modeled after a 65 million year old dinosaur. And that's the end. So I appreciate your attention and listening. And last questions.
I'll start off with a question myself, sort of more of a comment than it is a question, regarding the frog fruit. Earlier this spring, I was out walking my dog, and I'm always intrigued with anything that's a really tiny, small bloom. And here I saw 3 lots down along the road right away was this little bitty tiny plant with a little bitty tiny white bloom. What is that? And after I figured it all out, it turned out to be frog fruit. So since that was an empty lot and nobody gave a hoot on the road right way, I dug up several of them and moved them down to my front yard. And now I have them propagating in my front yard. There's not much to them yet. It's not like you had in your picture, but they are moving along, and I was always just curious as what they would do. And so it's kind of interesting to see what they would do when you had them showed in your picture there. But I'm going to continue to watch those.
Yeah.
And if anybody is curious about those, I can maybe explain a little bit more about it or show some more of them that I have growing, or take pictures of what I have growing now and spreading. Spreading very slow. I thought it might spread a little faster, but it's slow.
You can enhance spreading by watering during droughts and things like that, but I don't know that you can do too much.
Well, I usually give all my plants up there a little hybrid tea. I mean,
Yeah.
compost tea, so that probably won't help them.
Yeah, that might help. That's good.
Okay, then.
Yeah, vacant lots are great places to collect seeds and plants.
Yeah. One of the questions I have here from Margie Erickson is, where is Plant Delights?
Oh, Plant Delights is a nursery. Their mailing address is Raleigh. They're just south of Raleigh. And so you should Google Plant Delights Nursery. You get their online catalog. They mostly sell the strangest, I shouldn't say that. They sell some of the most exotic plants in the world that are hardy here. They definitely do not sell a lot of everyday plants, but they have a certain percentage of natives, and
Oh,
they probably have more trilliums than any other nursery. They probably have more pitcher plants than any other nursery. They'll have some native fern. They'll have a smattering of native plants, um, especially ones that are not commonly available. Uh, they have done a lot of breeding with our native baptisias, and so I would check out their website and just, if you're interested in natives, you have to pick through and see what's native. If you're interested in plants in general, you'll see all of those, and they're expensive because there's no place else to get them, and he's gone to a lot of trouble to propagate them. And so you might choose carefully what you want to try, but um, it's my favorite nursery to go visit. You should go there when they have their open house sessions in the spring and fall, just to see. I dare say he has more plants in one place there than as a garden than any place else in North America,
really? Wow.
maybe in the world.
Wow. Wow. Hmm. Well,
So otherwise, finding a good nursery is hard. There are two or three native plant nurseries in your area. I have a list of them somewhere. I don't know very many of them. I haven't been to very many of them down there. But on your fall, I do have right at my fingertips here your fall festival. On the last pages, on the very last page is a listing of A through E places to get native plants.
there
And
was there was a map that you could click on and
yeah,
see a map online. Yeah.
exactly. There's a map, and so there are places to see plants like the New Hanover Arboretum or the library, Halliburton Park, etc. And so, and several listings of plants that people could go to. So you could either, folks who may not have your fall festival handout, you might could make that available, and or direct people to some of the nurseries. One of my favorite ones we went to there was the Shelton.
Oh, yeah. Meg Shelton's herb farm.
Yeah, the herb farm. Boy, she a nice. That was so nice there.
Yes.
Um, I was I was sad to only be able to spend a few minutes there. Uh,
I understand.
there's a nice wood. There's a nice woods there to walk through, and the nursery there has X number of natives and non-natives. Margaret Shelton. So Margaret
Yep.
has a wonderful thing there. She loves those plants. I've sent people there.
Yeah. Yes. I understand she has some pawpaw trees there, and I need to go down there. I want to get a pawpaw. My pawpaw tree didn't make it, so I got to try again.
Okay. Well, my advice there is you get a new tree, and the first year it's in the ground, you water it every week unless it's rained.
Okay.
So getting through 1 week of drought could make all the difference,
Okay.
particularly on your coastal property where it gets hot really quickly and the soil dries out really quickly. So pay more attention to watering
Okay.
the first year. That's advice to everyone.
Okay. Well, we had numerous people thank you for your presentation.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad to have done that.
Yes, and
And it was good to see you again, Charlie, and good to see Paul. And I didn't see very many people on this list
you see their names.
because they didn't all pop up on my computer. But you guys have a great operation. That's not the right word. You're a great group down there that work together and do many things with Audubon and with native plants and with coastal landscaping. And
We're a little hampered this year from our walks because of the COVID. But
sure, that's ruined everybody's life, hasn't it?
I know I know what I wanted to add. I was thinking here about fly traps. Also, people want to, besides the reader garden, if you're more handy to go to UNCW campus, they have a couple of bogs made out of barrels outside. They're over near the greenhouse there
Okay.
on UNCW, and they have some pitcher plants and they have some fly traps
Okay.
growing in those growing there, so they can see them there.
Yeah, UNCW would be good, and also out at the what's the state park just north of Wilmington,
State Park north of Wilmington. Help me, Paul.
out on the coast there. That's a great place to see native plants.
Paul's muted. I can't think of the name of it right now.
Well, it's it's right on the Cape Fear River there.
Oh,
It's like
I know.
the name escapes me at the moment, but it's well known.
Yes, I know what you mean.
State park.
I can't think of it either, but I know what you mean. Yes. Well, anyway,
It might be Carolina Beach State Park.
well, that's down to the south. Yes, Carolina Beach State Park is down to the south of Wilmington.
Okay.
But
Well, then I don't know. I don't know the word.
The river. I'm losing the name right this minute. But anyway.
That's a great place to see plants in many different habitats from dry to wet.
Yes. Okay. Well, again, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again, Larry, and we will be in contact with you. And I'm going to have this. I got the recording of this, and I'll make it available to those that didn't attend. So I will say fairly well, and thank you all for attending.
Sure. So long. And I'm going to punch the button that says stop sharing.
Yep.
All right.